Okay, so we're on to part two of our Migrating to Bitwig Studio little mini series. And in this part, it will be a little bit of a tour. So in the first part, it was a presentation, a lot of opinion, a lot of like personal anecdotes. And in this part, it's going to be, this is the program. This is kind of how it works and operates. As a reminder, this is not designed as like a pure beginner's guide to Bitwig Studio. This is for people considering making that DAW switch for whatever reason. And so I'll be skipping over a lot of things that may be like common sense to people who've already worked with DAWs so that I can show you here's what's kind of unique about the program. And then by the end, you might have a better idea if this is going to be the right DAW for you to switch to. I'm certainly not saying that this DAW is for everyone. I've tried recording this video like a dozen times by starting with one of the demo tracks, and I found that I was just jumping around way too much. So instead, I'm going to start from kind of scratch. This is how the program opens. When I open it, when I have it set up, it might be slightly different for you. I'm not sure if I'm actually basing this off a template or not. It doesn't really matter, but this is how the program opens. It might open with the browser open. It might open with the inspector open. And you can make this interface as simple or as complex or as like advanced as you want it to be, depending on what you're doing at any given time. That's why I love this program. It's very, very flexible interface wise, and it never really slows you down unless you have it slow you down. Is the best way I can describe it. But let's go ahead and just like close down everything. Right now, we are in the arranger view. This is your classic left to right, sort of old school music making style. You also have the option to go in and work with more of a, let's see, what do they technically call it? They call it a clip launcher. This is where you could lay down your sketches and then eventually you kind of print to the canvas here. You can have both open at the same time, and in fact, you can be playing things from the timeline and then messing around with clips if you want to do that. Very flexible for you, and we'll look more at that when we open up the demo project. But for now, let's just go to the clip launcher, and let's just like delete everything. Okay, everything except for the master track. So this is as basic as it can go when we go and we bring that down. Okay, so this is just our timeline. Everything is completely at the most basic level here. We can go to our dashboard by clicking this icon up here. We can also go into File, Show Dashboard. Nothing new or exciting there. So under User, this is where you'll find your projects and any templates that you have. Under Settings, here's where you'll determine the interface, and this program is very good at kind of working with whatever setup you have by default. There are great presets that you can just jump into right away. You don't have to really mess around too much once you select one of these guys. And in my case, single display large, that's what I'm working with. I also have the ability to go and scale this further by right clicking up here, or I've even set up a very basic key command for this so that if I want to zoom in or zoom out, I can do that with just a couple of clicks. For teaching purposes, that becomes very useful. And also in some cases with like audio editing or even like note editing, being able to zoom in and zoom out on command becomes very useful for you. We have behavior. These are the sort of things that you'll set up on your own. The one that might be most interesting to you is the use raw audio if sample is setting. And what this means is if I bring in a clip, like let's say it's just a drum hit and it's like a second in length, it's not going to try and stretch that. It's not going to try and fit it to the tempo, so to speak. And anything that is longer than 30 seconds, in reality, what you'd probably want to do is like bump this up to 5 and like bump this down to 10. Only because the program does struggle with it to some degree. Now, I've gotten so used to when it does or doesn't do it and just changing it that I'm fine leaving it at these default settings, but you can certainly go in and change things. We also have an automatically create fades when you have an event split. So if you're chopping things up, it's going to create a small little micro fade for you, and you can set the length of that there, or you can turn it off completely, but I wouldn't recommend that. You don't even hear it. It's not even really audible, but it's useful to try and prevent clicks and pops. And then down here, we have things like our bounce settings. And if you want to go all the way up to 32-bit, you can do that. On now to our audio settings here, you can see that we have our audio interface selected, and we can choose our sample rate, and then we can set up our inputs and outputs. I have a video with version 1 that's basically still true for version 2 if you're doing a DJ setup and you want to try and like add your headphones, and then you can go over into your settings here and kind of work with the Q mode. I'm not going to probably cover that in this video, but it's very easy to set up if that's what you want to do. And then we also have our input buses. In this case, I have a microphone, have to have the microphone plugged in to record this video. And then also we have a synthesizer set up, and I have stereo input, which is not like another set of inputs. It's just if I was working with a stereo synth instead of working with a mono synth or working with a microphone, I'd have access to that. If you have an audio interface with tons and tons of inputs, as most people probably do, you'll have much more flexibility here in how you set all this up. But this is all I can do with the Duet. In the recording, these are things that are very much depending on your personal taste on how you want to record. If you want record quantization turned on, you want the pre-roll turned on, you want auto arm turned on or off, which means if I create a new instrument track, it's going to already have the little red icon up and ready to go, but with an audio track, it's not. Things of this nature. Okay, things that you can select on your own. So let's go ahead now and we'll do 2 examples. We'll start by creating an audio track. We can either right click or use the shortcut. And now I need to look at my inputs and outputs. I could do that in a few different ways. One way would be to like double click and use the inspector, or I can go down here into our inputs and outputs and I can set up now what I want to have. So for input, I want to choose our microphone. Okay, if I hit the record button now, you can hear we're getting that weird feedback. I don't know if you'll hear that or not, or if it's just me, but I can turn off the monitoring. And now to record, I can just go in. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 4, 5, 6, testing, 1, 2, 3. All right, we've got that set up. I can go ahead and disarm this, or then even go in and choose no input. Now we can play it back. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing, 4, 5, 6, testing, 1, 2, 3. So that's how you would record an audio track. Nothing fancy, nothing super exciting. I guess it is worth noting what happens when we have our loop turned on. We'll make this very short. We will set this up again. Testing, 1, 2, 3. We are testing 4, 5, 6. How about 7, 8, 9, 10? Okay, so you can see what's just happened there with how it's kind of going over and over. But what I can actually do is I can take this guy and we're going to get that entire recording if we go and bring this out. And now we could listen to it. Testing, 1, 2, 3. We are testing 4, 5, 6. How about 7, 8, 9, 10? And then if I wanted to, that's going to drive me crazy. If I wanted to go in and chop this up and then get our different takes on different clips and so forth, I could very easily do that. Right now, there's not really a good kind of like comping mode like you have inside of Logic or in Pro Tools or in a lot of other programs, but it does the job for the most part, especially when you know that you have the full clip right there. Okay, so that's how things go down with recording audio. When it comes to an instrument track, I'm going to bring that in here, and you can see by default this is armed, and this is now selected to be all ins. And you're thinking, well, how do we find that like input on our base station? You could either do it via the audio track, but the easier thing to do is actually to go into our browser, and we can do that in a few different ways. I'll do it from here for now, and we're going to look for hardware instrument. If we want to go to categories, this might be easier, and I go to hardware. We have CV if we're working with more of a modular synth or just our basic hardware instrument. I can bring that on, and now to see it, I can either double click or I can go down here and just bring up the device panel. So let's double click. Here it is, our hardware instrument, and I'm going to go to my audio input and I'm going to choose the base station, and I should actually just be able to click, and it works like so. Now, in some cases, it's a little bit more complicated. Let's see if I click the key station. Yeah, in this instance, it's not going to work. I have a very odd kind of setup that allows my Access virus to work simply, but I have the base station selected. And now the advantage of recording in this way is that I'm actually going to be recording a clip. I'm not just going to be recording a raw audio waveform. So we'll turn loop off this time. And now when I play back. And the other great advantage of this is I can add on effects, either note effects or actual effects, from within the device. I don't have to do any kind of complex routing to accomplish that, and I don't have to automatically bounce anything either. So let's go into Node Effects here, and when I click this little plus, we're going to be brought with the browser, the pop-up browser, which I can also access by just clicking the B button. But in this case, because I know what I want, it makes more sense for me to go into here. And just as a reminder, I should have said this at the very beginning, a DAW is just like a container. It's a blank container that then you fill with whatever you want to fill to ultimately make music. So when I go into my Node Effects, we're going to automatically be brought up into Bitwig and into these Node Effects, things that you could feasibly put in here. And anything that's in blue is something that you'd bring in. So let's, for example, bring in the arpeggiator. I can click OK, or I could even go further here and go into presets. And now I have my arpeggiator presets already brought up for me. So let's just pick something like dance hall. I don't know what it's going to sound like. I'll click OK. Now we have that arpeggiator. Sounds a little bit better. And if I want to sample different presets of this, I can just go up here. Choose something else. Find something that's close to what I want. None of these are that close. All right, that's close enough, I guess. Click OK, and now, of course, we could adjust things like the tempo. Maybe we'll try a different preset on the bass station. Okay, that's kind of cool. I'm getting too into like just messing around and making music. That's not the important part of this video. But we have our Node Effects here, and then we also have our classic audio style effects that we could bring in as well. Now, here's what's important to note is that everything in Bitwig is like a container. So while I could bring effects on here, I could also bring effects in outside of the container, or I could bring Node Effects in outside the container. But if I bring a Node Effect in outside of the container in this case, it has no effect because this is occurring after now the hardware instrument. It would have to go before. But when you have something like a Node Effect already built in, you can just drag and drop it in there, and it automatically kind of does that routing for you, which is very nice and kind of convenient. It also keeps things very clean and very organized if you're OCD like I am. We can go into our effects as well here, and we can just work specifically with Bitwig effects. Let's go in and let's try like a delay. Let's use delay 1. And then again, I could go into our presets. That's kind of cool. And this is honestly where Bitwig could improve, would be like more presets. For the delay too, we have 45 presets we can work with. I want something really bizarre. That's pretty cool. Now let's bring the mix value down. All right, something like that. And you can actually see that we also do have a feedback effect in here as well, which in this case is a bit crusher. And you can hear the effect that that's having. But again, I can keep closing things down. And this is why like Bitwig is kind of like, if you understand how signal flow works, it's kind of like the ultimate DAW for you, because you can keep things very organized as it gets kind of more and more progressively complicated. You can even add a wet effect just specific to the bit 8 here. Right? You can go as deep or as basic as you want. And like I said before, with these audio effects, I could also just bring this outside of the hardware instrument and it would be fine. There are some applications where like, though you may not want to do that. Maybe I'll show you that next, because we do have more than just basic instrument tracks and audio tracks. We also have what are referred to as like hybrid tracks. So I'm going to add an instrument track here, and there's a way you can create this. You can right click and say convert to hybrid track or create to audio track, but I'll create to a hybrid track later on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by adding in an instrument. And inside of Bitwig, your go-to is typically going to be the polysynth. Let's see, do we have instruments in here? Where are they? We'll go to synth, we'll add the polysynth, and we'll just immediately start by bringing up some kind of preset. Here, obviously, there's a lot more presets. There's over 100 that you can choose from. So let's go in here and let's pick like a pluck sound. And we'll just pick this one, listen to it. All right, good enough for me. Again, this isn't about anything more than just going through these examples. Okay, so we have that, and we have those effects that are built into it, but I could also get really fancy here and like, let's just create like a clip, and we'll record a clip in. Doesn't really matter, does it? Okay, not the greatest thing ever done, doesn't matter. Not for this context anyway. So we can listen back to that. But let's say that I also wanted to add on like an audio clip onto this same thing. I can actually do that. Let's get rid of our inputs and outputs for now. And I'm gonna go back into our browser, and I'm gonna add just like a drum beat, okay? This is clearly not something that's very contextual, but all right, the first one's fine. And you'll see that we're at 115, and this is now, because of the length of the clip, it's going to attempt to probably stretch this. It sounds pretty terrible. And you can see that when I brought it on, that what it did was it created a hybrid track. Now, it did that by, it has like this little audio icon and a little instrument icon. You might be thinking like, when would you ever actually do this? And the answer would be like, let's say you have a drum synthesizer, like let's say it's even just a kick drum. In one section of the song, you might use a drum machine. In another section of the song, you might just use an audio clip. And what's cool is that you can either like process these things together or separate. So right now, the synthesizer still has those effects on it. But when we play this, it's not running through those effects that are built into the instrument. But if I still wanted to process this in some way, I could. I could go in here and I could add on a reverb. And that reverb is now applied to both. Right, you can hear the reverb there. And you can hear the reverb there, obviously. So that's kind of a cool feature of how the signal flow is working in here, and why in some cases you put stuff into boxes and in other cases you don't. The boxes stick to that instrument or to that effect, to that device, and outside of the box it applies to everything that's going on inside of that track. In this case, we have a hybrid track. So those are the basics with your audio tracks, your instrument tracks, and your hybrid tracks.